Sarah Martinez never imagined that accepting a logistics coordinator position at Forward Operating Base Sentinel would change her life forever. At 28, she had spent 5 years working for various defense contractors across the Middle East, managing supply chains and coordinating equipment deliveries to military installations. The pay was excellent, the work challenging, and she felt proud contributing to operations that kept soldiers safe and missions running smoothly. Base Sentinel sat in a strategic location in eastern Afghanistan, housing approximately 800 personnel, including active-duty military, support staff, and civilian contractors like Sarah. The facility sprawled across several acres of dusty terrain, surrounded by concrete barriers, razor wire, and watchtowers that cast long shadows across the compound during sunrise and sunset. Sarah had been stationed there for 6 months, long enough to establish routines and build relationships with both military personnel and fellow contractors. Her daily routine began at 0500 hours with physical training alongside the soldiers. Though not required for civilian personnel, Sarah maintained this discipline from her previous assignments. She believed staying physically fit and mentally sharp was essential in such environments. After PT and breakfast, she would head to the logistics center, a converted shipping container that served as her office and command center for tracking incoming supplies, coordinating helicopter deliveries, and managing the complex web of resources that kept the base operational. The logistics center buzzed with constant activity. Radio chatter filled the air as helicopter pilots reported their positions, supply convoys provided status updates, and various departments submitted requests for everything from ammunition to medical supplies. Sarah's job required her to balance competing priorities, work within strict security protocols, and maintain detailed records of every item that entered or left the base. She took pride in her efficiency and had earned respect from both military commanders and her civilian supervisors. Living quarters for civilian contractors consisted of modified shipping containers arranged in neat rows behind the main administrative buildings. Sarah's container home measured roughly 8 feet by 20 feet, containing a single bed, small desk, storage lockers, and basic electrical outlets. She had personalized the space with photographs from home, a few books, and a small plant that somehow survived despite the harsh desert conditions. The accommodations were Spartan but functional, and Sarah had grown accustomed to the tight quarters and shared bathroom facilities. Base Sentinel's mission involved providing logistical support for smaller outposts scattered throughout the region. Helicopter flights departed daily carrying supplies, personnel, and equipment to remote locations where soldiers conducted patrols, training exercises, and humanitarian missions. Sarah coordinated these flights, ensuring proper manifests, weight distributions, and delivery schedules. Each mission required careful planning, as helicopter capacity was limited and weather conditions could change rapidly in the mountainous terrain. The base maintained a structured social hierarchy that Sarah navigated carefully. Military personnel held ultimate authority, while civilian contractors occupied a separate but important role in daily operations. Sarah had developed professional relationships with key personnel, including Major Davidson, the base commander, Captain Rodriguez from the aviation unit, and Chief Warrant Officer Jenkins, who supervised helicopter maintenance. These relationships proved crucial for coordinating complex logistics operations and resolving issues that inevitably arose. Security briefings occurred weekly, covering threat assessments, evacuation procedures, and updates on regional activities. Sarah attended these sessions religiously, understanding that civilian contractors faced unique risks. Unlike military personnel who received extensive combat training, contractors relied heavily on base security measures and emergency protocols. She had completed basic security training before deployment, including weapons familiarization and first aid certification, but hoped never to use these skills in actual emergencies. Communication with family back home in Texas remained challenging due to time zone differences and limited internet access. Sarah scheduled weekly video calls with her parents and younger brother, carefully avoiding details about security concerns or dangerous incidents. She maintained an upbeat tone during these conversations, focusing on positive aspects of her work and the interesting people she had met. Her family worried constantly about her safety, but Sarah reassured them that civilian contractors worked in secure areas away from direct combat operations. The base dining facility served as an informal social center where personnel from different units gathered for meals and conversation. Sarah often ate with other contractors, sharing stories from previous deployments and discussing plans for future assignments. These conversations revealed the nomadic nature of contractor life, with most people moving between different bases and projects every 6 to 18 months. Some contractors had been working overseas for decades, while others like Sarah were relatively new to this lifestyle. Weather patterns in the region created additional challenges for logistics operations. Summer temperatures exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit, while winter brought unexpected snowfall and freezing conditions to the mountainous areas. Sandstorms could ground aircraft for days, creating backlogs of critical supplies and frustrated personnel waiting for delayed deliveries. Sarah learned to build flexibility into her scheduling, maintaining buffer stocks of essential items and developing contingency plans for weather-related disruptions. Local Afghan workers employed by the base provided additional labor for construction projects, food service, and maintenance tasks. These employees underwent extensive background checks and security screenings before receiving access to the facility. Sarah worked with several local supervisors to coordinate supply deliveries and storage arrangements. Despite language barriers, she developed mutual respect with these workers who demonstrated impressive dedication and work ethic despite security risks they faced for cooperating with international forces. Training exercises conducted monthly tested base readiness for various emergency scenarios. These drills included simulated attacks, medical emergencies, equipment failures, and evacuation procedures. Sarah participated actively in these exercises, learning proper responses and identifying areas where logistics coordination could improve emergency preparedness. She took detailed notes during each drill, creating personal reference materials for actual emergency situations. The isolation of Base Sentinel created a unique community atmosphere among residents. Evening activities included movie nights in the recreation center, informal sports competitions, and holiday celebrations that brought together personnel from different backgrounds and nationalities. Sarah appreciated these social opportunities, which provided welcome breaks from work-related stress and helped build the personal connections that made deployment life more bearable. Equipment maintenance represented a constant challenge in the desert environment. Sand and dust infiltrated every piece of machinery, requiring frequent cleaning and preventive maintenance schedules. Sarah coordinated with maintenance teams to ensure adequate supplies of filters, lubricants, and replacement parts for critical systems. Vehicle breakdowns occurred regularly, and helicopter mechanical issues could strand personnel at remote outposts for extended periods. Her workspace in the logistics center contained multiple computer terminals, radio equipment, and large paper charts showing regional topography and base locations. Sarah maintained both digital and paper records, understanding that electronic systems could fail during emergencies. Wall-mounted whiteboards displayed current flight schedules, convoy movements, and priority supply requests. The organized chaos of her office reflected the complex coordination required to keep multiple operations running simultaneously. Sleep quality suffered due to helicopter flights departing at all hours, generator noise, and the stress of constant security awareness. Sarah had learned to sleep through most routine noises, but remained alert to unusual sounds that might indicate problems requiring immediate attention. Emergency situations could develop rapidly, and logistics coordinators needed to respond quickly to changing requirements and shifting priorities. Base communication systems included satellite phones, radio networks, and limited internet access for official business. Sarah maintained contact with supply vendors, transportation companies, and other bases through these systems. Internet bandwidth was severely limited, making large file transfers challenging and video communications unreliable during peak usage periods. She learned to work efficiently with these constraints, developing streamlined communication procedures and backup methods for critical information. Personal relationships developed slowly in the high-stress environment, but Sarah had formed genuine friendships with several colleagues. These relationships provided emotional support during difficult periods and created a sense of extended family among people far from home. Trust became essential when personal safety might depend on others' actions during emergency situations. 6 months into her assignment, Sarah had settled into comfortable routines and felt confident in her abilities to handle the demanding logistics responsibilities. She had successfully coordinated hundreds of helicopter flights, managed thousands of supply requests, and helped maintain smooth operations despite numerous challenges and setbacks. Her performance evaluations consistently rated her work as exemplary, and she had received informal praise from military commanders who appreciated her professionalism and dedication. The morning of November 15th began like any other day at Base Sentinel. Sarah completed her usual physical training, attended the daily briefing session, and arrived at the logistics center by 0630 hours to review overnight messages and prepare for scheduled helicopter flights. Weather conditions appeared favorable, with clear skies and minimal wind that would support normal flight operations. 3 cargo helicopters were scheduled to depart for different outposts, carrying routine supplies and returning with personnel completing their rotations. As Sarah reviewed flight manifests and coordinated final preparations, she noticed increased radio chatter from base security personnel. Routine patrol reports mentioned unusual activity in surrounding areas, but such reports occurred regularly and rarely resulted in significant changes to daily operations. She continued her normal procedures, trusting that security personnel would provide appropriate warnings if genuine threats developed. Unknown to Sarah and most base personnel, intelligence reports had identified increased insurgent activity in the region during recent weeks. Small groups had been observed conducting surveillance of military installations and transportation routes. While these observations were concerning to security analysts, they had not yet risen to the level requiring major operational changes or heightened alert status. The first helicopter departed on schedule at 0800 hours, carrying supplies to a small outpost 30 kilometers to the northeast. Radio communications with the aircraft remained normal as it disappeared beyond the mountain ridges that surrounded Base Sentinel. Sarah began preparing manifests for the second flight, scheduled to depart at 0930 hours with medical supplies and equipment maintenance parts. At 0847 hours, everything changed. The first warning came through radio communications from the departed helicopter, reporting small arms fire from multiple locations along their flight route. Within seconds, explosion sounds echoed across Base Sentinel as incoming mortar rounds impacted various areas of the facility. Sarah's comfortable routine shattered instantly as base personnel scrambled to respond to what would become the most intense attack in the facility's operational history. The first mortar round exploded near the vehicle maintenance area, sending a shockwave through the ground that Sarah felt in her chest. The logistics center's metal walls rattled as dust and debris showered down from the ceiling. Her initial reaction was confusion rather than fear, as the sound resembled controlled demolitions she had witnessed during base construction projects. This momentary denial lasted only seconds before additional explosions confirmed that Base Sentinel was under coordinated attack. Training kicked in as Sarah activated emergency protocols she had practiced but never expected to use. She immediately switched all radio communications to encrypted channels and began broadcasting alert messages to incoming aircraft and supply convoys approaching the base. The helicopter scheduled to depart at 0930 hours was still on the ground, and she needed to ensure its crew received immediate notification of the security situation. Her hands moved automatically across radio controls while her mind processed the surreal reality that people were actively trying to kill everyone at the base. Emergency sirens began wailing throughout the facility as base personnel took cover in designated hardened positions. Sarah's assigned shelter was a reinforced bunker located 50 meters from the logistics center, but reaching it required crossing open ground currently being targeted by mortar fire. She made the calculated decision to remain in her relatively protected metal container rather than risk exposure during movement. This choice would prove crucial as events unfolded over the following hours. radio communications exploded with urgent traffic from multiple sources. The helicopter that had departed earlier reported being engaged by rocket-propelled grenades and small arms fire from concealed positions. Patrol units outside the base were attempting to locate and engage enemy firing positions while coordinating with base defense teams. Supply convoys were being diverted to alternate routes or instructed to hold their positions until the situation stabilized. Sarah found herself at the center of a communication storm, relaying critical information between various units while maintaining her own situational awareness. Through her office window, Sarah could see base personnel moving between defensive positions while wearing full combat gear. Civilian contractors who were not essential personnel were being evacuated to the most protected areas of the facility. As a logistics coordinator responsible for aircraft and convoy communications, Sarah was considered essential and needed to remain at her post unless directly ordered to evacuate. This responsibility both terrified and focused her as incoming mortar rounds continued to impact various areas around the base. The attackers had clearly conducted extensive reconnaissance before launching their assault. Mortar rounds were targeting specific high-value areas including the helicopter landing zones, fuel storage facilities, communication centers, and administrative buildings. Rather than random bombardment, this represented a sophisticated attack designed to disrupt base operations and potentially trigger secondary explosions from fuel or ammunition storage areas. Sarah realized that her logistics center, controlling aircraft movements and supply coordination, was likely among the priority targets. Communication with the embattled helicopter became increasingly urgent as the crew reported multiple engine warning lights and decreasing fuel levels due to damage from enemy fire. The aircraft was attempting to return to Base Sentinel, but the landing zone was currently being targeted by enemy mortars. Sarah coordinated with air traffic control and base security to identify alternative landing areas that might provide greater protection for the damaged aircraft and its crew. Major Davidson, the base commander, established direct communication with Sarah's logistics center as he coordinated the overall defense response. His calm, professional voice provided reassurance despite the chaotic situation developing around them. He needed constant updates on aircraft status, convoy positions, and supply levels to make tactical decisions about defending the base and requesting additional support from regional military units. Sarah became his primary information source for logistics-related intelligence. Incoming intelligence reports indicated that multiple insurgent groups had coordinated this attack, with teams positioned around the base perimeter and along key transportation routes. The assault was designed to isolate Base Sentinel from external support while inflicting maximum damage to infrastructure and personnel. Preliminary estimates suggested between 50 and 100 attackers were involved, representing the largest coordinated assault on the facility since its establishment. The damaged helicopter finally appeared on the horizon, trailing smoke and flying at reduced altitude. Sarah coordinated emergency landing procedures while base medical personnel prepared for potential casualties. Fire suppression teams positioned themselves near the designated emergency landing zone, which had been hastily cleared of debris from earlier mortar impacts. The aircraft's approach was unsteady, and Sarah maintained constant radio contact with the pilots to provide guidance and encouragement during their difficult landing attempt. Enemy fire intensified as the helicopter approached, with small arms rounds impacting areas around the landing zone. Base defensive positions returned fire towards suspected enemy locations, while the aircraft crew struggled to maintain control of their damaged machine. Sarah watched through her window as the helicopter touched down hard, bounced once, and settled onto the makeshift landing area with its engines still running. Medical personnel immediately rushed toward the aircraft to evacuate any injured crew members. Explosion sounds had become a constant background noise punctuated by the crack of rifle fire and the deeper rumble of heavy weapons. Sarah's training had prepared her for emergency situations, but the reality of being under sustained attack was unlike anything she had imagined. Every sound made her flinch, and her hands shook as she continued operating radio equipment and coordinating with various units. Adrenaline kept her focused, but she could feel the physical toll that constant stress was taking on her body. Supply convoys approaching the base were being systematically ambushed by insurgent teams positioned along major routes. Radio reports indicated that multiple vehicles had been damaged or destroyed, with several drivers and security personnel killed or wounded. Sarah was coordinating alternative routes and extraction efforts for surviving convoy members, while simultaneously managing aircraft emergencies and base communication requirements. The complexity of simultaneous crises threatened to overwhelm even her experienced multitasking abilities. Base defensive measures included counter-battery fire directed toward suspected mortar positions, but enemy teams appeared to be using mobile equipment and changing positions frequently. Reconnaissance drones launched from the base were attempting to locate enemy firing positions, but several had been shot down by insurgent air defense weapons. The attackers demonstrated sophisticated tactics and equipment that exceeded typical insurgent capabilities, suggesting possible external training and support. Sarah's logistics center became an informal command post as various personnel sought updates on aircraft status, supply situations, and communication with external units. Her container office was crowded with radio operators, liaison officers, and base personnel who needed current information to make tactical decisions. Despite the chaos, she maintained detailed logs of all communications and decisions, understanding that this information would be critical for post-incident analysis and improvement of base security procedures. Emergency medical situations began developing as mortar fragments wounded base personnel in various locations. Sarah coordinated helicopter evacuations for the most serious casualties while managing limited medical supply inventory. The base medical facility was operating beyond capacity, and additional supplies were urgently needed. However, ground transportation was impossible due to ongoing attacks, and helicopter flights remained extremely dangerous due to enemy air defenses. Ammunition expenditure rates exceeded normal supply levels as base defensive positions engaged enemy teams throughout the surrounding area. Sarah worked with ammunition depot personnel to redistribute available supplies and coordinate emergency resupply requests to regional headquarters. The base maintained sufficient ammunition stocks for extended operations, but current consumption rates could exhaust certain specialized munitions within hours rather than the typical days or weeks. Communication systems began experiencing intermittent failures as enemy fire damaged antennas and power systems throughout the base. Sarah's logistics center maintained multiple backup communication methods, including satellite phones and portable radio equipment, but coordination became increasingly difficult as various units lost contact with each other. She found herself serving as a communication relay point, passing messages between units that could no longer communicate directly. Food and water supply concerns emerged as the attack extended beyond the expected duration of typical insurgent operations. The base dining facility had been damaged by mortar fire, and normal meal service was suspended as personnel remained in defensive positions. Sarah coordinated emergency distribution of field rations and bottled water while monitoring consumption rates and available inventory levels. Maintaining adequate nutrition and hydration was essential for sustained defensive operations. Individual acts of heroism began emerging as base personnel responded to the crisis. Sarah observed soldiers voluntarily exposing themselves to enemy fire to rescue wounded colleagues, mechanics working under dangerous conditions to repair critical equipment, and medical personnel treating casualties while mortar rounds continued to impact nearby areas. These examples of courage under fire inspired her own determination to continue performing her duties despite the personal risks involved. The psychological impact of sustained combat began affecting everyone on the base. Sarah noticed increased tension in radio communications, shorter tempers during coordination discussions, and visible stress reactions among personnel who entered her logistics center. She realized that her own calm, professional demeanor was helping to stabilize others, and she consciously worked to maintain composure despite her internal fear and anxiety about the ongoing situation. Enemy tactics evolved throughout the day as insurgent teams adapted to base defensive responses. Initial mortar attacks gave way to sniper fire from concealed positions, followed by probing attacks against base perimeter defenses. The attackers demonstrated patience and tactical sophistication, suggesting this was not a desperate assault, but rather a calculated operation designed to achieve specific objectives over an extended period. Sarah began to understand that this crisis might continue for hours or even days rather than the brief firefight she had initially anticipated. As afternoon approached, Sarah realized that her role had expanded far beyond normal logistics coordination duties. She had become a central figure in the base's emergency response, providing critical communication services, coordinating multiple simultaneous operations, and serving as an information hub for tactical decision-making. The civilian contractor who had awakened that morning planning routine supply flights was now actively participating in combat operations, and she was discovering capabilities and courage she had never known she possessed. By mid-afternoon, the attack had transformed from an intense assault into a prolonged siege. Enemy forces had established defensive positions in the surrounding mountains, maintaining pressure on base Sentinel while preventing reinforcement or resupply operations. Sarah's logistics center had evolved into the nerve center for coordinating all movement and communication activities, making her a critical target for enemy forces who had begun directing focused fire toward her position. The first direct threat to Sarah's life came at approximately 1,430 hours when sniper fire began impacting the metal walls of her container office. Bullet holes appeared in the thin aluminum siding, with rounds passing dangerously close to her workstation. Rather than abandoning her position, Sarah dropped to the floor and continued operating radio equipment from beneath her desk. This decision reflected her growing understanding that abandoning the logistics center could collapse coordination efforts and potentially cost lives throughout the base. Major Davidson's voice crackled through the radio with urgent instructions. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were planning a major assault on the base perimeter, and defensive positions needed immediate resupply of ammunition and medical supplies. However, normal supply routes were under constant enemy observation, making traditional logistics operations impossible. Sarah began developing innovative solutions, using her detailed knowledge of base layout and supply inventory to identify alternative approaches. Working with Chief Warrant Officer Jenkins, Sarah coordinated a dangerous nighttime resupply operation using the base's maintenance tunnels and underground utility corridors. These passages had never been intended for logistics operations, but they provided concealed movement routes that could bypass enemy observation positions. Sarah volunteered to personally guide supply teams through the unfamiliar tunnel system, despite having no combat training and minimal experience with the underground infrastructure. The tunnel operation required Sarah to leave the relative safety of her logistics center and venture into underground passages that were dark, cramped, and potentially unstable. Armed with night vision equipment borrowed from military personnel and carrying communication gear to maintain contact with surface units, she led teams of soldiers and contractors through a maze of utility tunnels, drainage systems, and construction passages that connected various areas of the base. Navigation through the tunnel system proved more challenging than anticipated. Sarah relied on basic engineering drawings and her memory of base construction projects to identify routes that could accommodate personnel and equipment movement. Several passages were blocked by damaged infrastructure from mortar impacts, requiring detours through even more confined spaces. The physical demands of crawling through tight spaces while carrying communication equipment and guiding others tested her endurance and determination. Emergency lighting in the tunnels was minimal, and battery-powered equipment provided the only illumination for most of the journey. Sarah discovered that maintaining radio communication from underground positions was nearly impossible, requiring periodic returns to surface access points to coordinate with other units. These surface exposures were extremely dangerous, as enemy snipers had learned to watch potential emergence points and were prepared to engage any movement. The first resupply mission successfully delivered critical ammunition to defensive positions that had been running dangerously low during extended firefights. Sarah's knowledge of supply locations and Her ability to navigate the tunnel system enabled rapid distribution of materials that would have been impossible through surface movement. Word of the successful operation spread quickly throughout the base, boosting morale among personnel who had begun to feel isolated and abandoned. Enemy forces responded to the successful resupply by increasing their focus on identifying and targeting the underground movement routes. Mortar rounds began impacting areas around tunnel entrances, and enemy teams attempted to locate and block access points. Sarah realized that continued use of the same routes would eventually be detected, requiring constant adaptation and identification of new pathways through the underground infrastructure. Medical evacuations presented the most difficult challenges, as wounded personnel required careful handling during movement through confined tunnel passages. Sarah coordinated with base medical staff to develop procedures for safely transporting injured soldiers through the underground routes to more secure medical facilities. These operations required additional personnel and equipment, stretching the limits of what could be accomplished through the narrow tunnel system. Communication with regional military headquarters finally established contact during evening hours, providing the first external support since the attack began. Sarah played a crucial role in briefing higher command about base status, casualty reports, supply requirements, and enemy activity patterns. Her detailed logs and systematic documentation provided military planners with accurate information needed to coordinate rescue and reinforcement operations. Intelligence reports revealed that the attack on Base Sentinel was part of a larger coordinated offensive against multiple military installations throughout the region. Other bases were reporting similar assaults, preventing immediate reinforcement from nearby units. Sarah learned that Base Sentinel would need to maintain independent defensive operations for at least another 24 to 48 hours before significant external support could arrive. The psychological pressure of sustained combat was beginning to affect everyone's performance and decision-making abilities. Sarah observed increased mistakes in radio communications, delayed responses to urgent requests, and visible signs of stress among normally composed military personnel. She realized that maintaining morale and coordination effectiveness was becoming as important as managing logistics operations and tactical communications. Food and water conservation became critical concerns as the siege extended beyond anticipated duration. Sarah implemented rationing procedures for remaining supplies, while coordinating with base personnel to identify alternative water sources and emergency food reserves. The dining facility remained unusable due to structural damage, requiring distribution of individual field rations and bottled water to personnel in defensive positions. Enemy tactics evolved again during nighttime hours, with insurgent teams attempting infiltration operations against base perimeter defenses. Sarah coordinated communication between defensive positions and provided real-time intelligence about enemy movement patterns observed through base surveillance systems. Her logistics center became an informal command post for coordinating defensive responses to multiple simultaneous threats. Individual equipment failures began creating additional challenges as combat operations exceeded the normal operational limits of various systems. Radio batteries were depleting rapidly due to constant use. Vehicles required emergency maintenance after extended operations, and weapons systems needed cleaning and repair after firing thousands of rounds. Sarah managed spare parts inventory and coordinated maintenance priorities to keep essential equipment operational. The breakthrough moment came when Sarah identified a previously overlooked maintenance tunnel that connected directly to the base's communication center. This route provided access to more powerful radio equipment and satellite communication systems that had been damaged by enemy fire but could potentially be repaired. Working with communication specialists, she guided repair teams to the equipment through the protected underground route. Restoration of satellite communications enabled direct contact with military units preparing rescue operations from regional bases. Sarah provided detailed briefings about landing zone conditions, enemy positions, fuel availability, and medical requirements for incoming aircraft. Her comprehensive understanding of base logistics and current operational status made her the primary liaison for coordinating the complex rescue and reinforcement mission. The final phase of the siege began when friendly aircraft appeared on the horizon at dawn on the second day. Sarah coordinated landing zone preparation, casualty evacuation priorities, and rapid resupply operations as military reinforcements engaged enemy positions and established security perimeters around the base. Her role shifted from crisis management to recovery coordination as normal operations slowly resumed. Enemy forces began withdrawing as superior military reinforcements arrived and established overwhelming firepower advantages. The sophisticated insurgent operation had achieved some tactical objectives by disrupting base operations and inflicting casualties, but strategic goals of destroying the facility or eliminating its personnel had been unsuccessful due to effective defensive responses and Sarah's innovative logistics solutions. Casualty reports revealed that 13 base personnel had been killed and 37 wounded during the two-day siege. Property damage was extensive, with several buildings completely destroyed and most infrastructure requiring significant repair work. However, the base had maintained operational capability throughout the crisis, and no critical military equipment or supplies had been lost to enemy forces. Sarah's performance during the crisis earned recognition from military commanders and civilian supervisors who praised her initiative, courage, and innovative problem-solving abilities. Her decision to remain at her post despite personal danger, her development of underground resupply routes, and her coordination of communication activities had been essential to the base's successful defense. Military personnel who had worked with civilian contractors for years commented that they had never witnessed such dedication and capability from non-military personnel. The aftermath of the siege brought significant changes to Sarah's career and personal perspective. Media attention focused on her story as an example of civilian courage under fire, though Sarah preferred to emphasize the teamwork and professionalism of all base personnel rather than individual heroism. Military officials used her experience to revise emergency procedures and improve integration between military and civilian personnel during crisis situations. Psychological counseling became available for all personnel who had experienced the traumatic siege, and Sarah participated in these sessions to process her emotional responses to the life-threatening situations she had faced. The experience had fundamentally changed her understanding of her own capabilities and her commitment to supporting military operations in dangerous environments. Base reconstruction efforts provided opportunities for Sarah to apply lessons learned during the siege to improve logistics systems and emergency procedures. Her recommendations for enhanced underground communication networks, improved supply storage security, and better integration of civilian contractors into emergency response plans were implemented during the rebuilding process. 6 months after the siege, Sarah received offers for promotion and transfer to safer assignments, but she chose to remain at Base Sentinel to see the reconstruction through completion. Her decision reflected a personal transformation from someone who viewed contractor work as a job to someone who understood her role as part of a larger mission protecting people and advancing important objectives in a dangerous region. The insurgent attack had intended to demonstrate that military installations were vulnerable and that civilian personnel would abandon their posts when faced with serious threats. Instead, Sarah's response and the base's successful defense proved that dedication, innovation, and courage could overcome sophisticated enemy tactics and maintain operational effectiveness even under the most challenging circumstances. Her story became part of military training curricula, illustrating the importance of civilian contractors in modern military operations and demonstrating that non-military personnel could make critical contributions during combat situations. Sarah's experience showed that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges when their training, experience, and personal character were tested by life-threatening circumstances. The siege of Base Sentinel ended with enemy forces retreating and base personnel beginning recovery operations, but, for Sarah Martinez, it marked the beginning of a new understanding of her own strength, capabilities, and commitment to serving others in the world's most dangerous places. She had fought back not with weapons, but with intelligence, determination, and an unwavering dedication to the mission that had brought her to that remote base in the first place.